Fireside Tailes with Wolfgang. Episode 5. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions YouTube channel, CAPS Media Television Channel 6, KPPQ LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network. Greetings and salutations. Thank you for tuning in to Fireside Tailes with Wolfgang. I am Hunter Ackerman. Wolfgang and I would like to welcome you all for readings of some world-renowned classics. So, Wolfus, what would you like to hear?
This is called The Magic Shop by H.G. Wells. I'd seen the magic shop from afar several times. I had passed it once or twice, a shop of alluring little objects, magic balls, magic hens, wonderful cones, ventriloquist dolls, the material of the basket trick, packs of cards that looked all right, and all that sort of thing, but never had I thought of going in until one day, almost without warning, Gip hauled me by my finger right up to the window and so conducted himself that there was nothing for it but to take him in. I had not thought the place was there, to tell the truth, a modest-sized frontage in Regent Street between the picture shop and the place where the chicks run about just out of patent incubators, but there it was, sure enough. I had fancied it was down nearer the circus or round the corner in Oxford Street, or even in Holborn, but always over the way and just a little inaccessible it had been, with something of the mirage of its position. But here it was, now, quite indisputably, and the fat end of Gip's pointing finger made a noise upon the glass. "If I was rich," said Gip, dabbing a finger at the disappearing egg, "I'd buy myself that, and that," which was the crying baby, very human, and that, which was a mystery and called, so a neat card asserted, "Buy one and astonish your friends." "Anything," said Gip, "will disappear under one of those cones. I've read about it in a book." "And there, Dada, is the vanishing halfpenny. Only they've put it this way up so as we can't see how it's done." Gip, dear boy, inherits his mother's breeding, and he did not propose to enter the shop or worry in any way. Only, quite unconsciously, he lugged my finger doorward, and he made his interest clearer. It's not that scary a story. Did you have a nightmare already? What's up? We're just getting started. Oh yeah, by the way, Mama loves you. Told me to tell you. "That," he said, and pointed to the magic bottle. "If you had that," I said, at which promising inquiry he looked up with suddenly radiance. "I could show it to Jessie," he said, thoughtful as ever of others. "It's less than 100 days to your birthday, Gibbles," I said, and laid my hand on the door handle. Gip made no answer, but his grip tightened on my finger, and so we came into the shop. It was no common shop, this. It was a magic shop, and all the prancing precedence Gip would have taken in manner of mere toys was wanting. He left the burthen of the conversation to me. It was a little narrow shop, not very well lit, and the doorbell pinged again with a plaintive note as we closed it behind us. For a moment or so, we were alone and could glance about us. There was a tiger in papier-mâché on the glass case that covered the low counter, a grave, kind-eyed tiger that waggled his head in a methodical manner. There were several crystal spheres, a china hand holding magic cards, a stock of magic fish bowls in various sizes, and an immodest magic hat that shamelessly displayed its springs. On the floor were magic mirrors. One to draw you out long and thin, one to swell your head and vanish your legs, and one to make you short and fat like a draft. And while we were laughing at all of these, the shopman, I suppose, came in. At any rate, there he was behind the counter. A curious, sallow, dark man with one ear larger than the other and a chin like the toe cap of a boot. "What can we have the pleasure?" he said, spreading his long magic fingers on the glass case. And so, with a start, we were aware of him. "I want," I said, "to buy my little boy a few simple tricks." "I'll let you demand," he asked. "Mechanical? Domestic?" "Anything amusing?" said I. "Ah," said the shopman, and scratched his head for a moment as if thinking. Then, quite distinctly, he drew from his head a glass ball. "Something in this way," he said, and held it out. The action was unexpected. I'd seen the trick done at entertainments endless times before. It's part of the common stock of conjurers, but I had not expected it here. "That's good," I said with a laugh. "Isn't it?" said the shopman. Gip stretched out his disengaged hand to take this object and found merely a blank palm. "It's in your pocket," said the shopman. And there it was. How much will that be?" I asked. "We make no charge for glass balls," said the shopman politely. "We get them," he picked one out of his elbow as he spoke, "free." He produced another from the back of his neck and laid it beside its predecessor on the counter. Gip regarded his glass ball sagely, then directed a look of inquiry at the two on the counter, and finally brought his round-eyed scrutiny to the shopman, who smiled. "You may have those too," said the shopman, "and, if you don't mind, one from my mouth. So." Gip counseled me mutely for a moment, then in profound silence put away the 4 balls, resumed my reassuring finger, and nerved himself for the next event. "We get all our smaller tricks in that way," the shopman remarked. I laughed in the manner of one who subscribes to a jest. "Instead of going to the wholesale shop," I said. "Of course, it's cheaper." "In a way," the shopman said, "though we pay in the end. But not so heavily as people suppose. Our larger tricks and our daily provisions and all the other things we want, we get out of that hat. And, you know, sir, if you'll excuse my saying it, there isn't a whole wholesale shop, not for genuine magic goods, sir. I don't know if you noticed our inscription, the genuine magic shop." He drew a business card from his cheek and handed it to me. "Genuine," he said, with his finger on the word, and added, "There is absolutely no deception, sir." He seems to be carrying out the joke pretty thoroughly, I thought. He turned to Gip with a smile of remarkable affability. "You know, you are the right sort of boy." I was surprised at his knowing that, because in the interests of discipline, we keep it rather a secret even at home, but Gip received it in an unflinching silence, keeping a steadfast eye on him. "It's only the right sort of boy gets through that doorway." And As if by way of illustration, there came a rattling at the door, and a squeaking little voice could be faintly heard. "Nah, I warn you. Don't go in there. I want to go in there, Dad. I want to go in there. Yeah!" And then the accents of a downtrodden parent urging consolations and propitiations. "It's locked, Edward," he said. "But it isn't," said I. "It is, sir," said the shopman. "Always for that sort of child." And as he spoke, we had a glimpse of the other youngster, a little white face, pallid from sweet eating and over-sepid food and distorted by evil passions, a ruthless little egotist, pawing at the enchanted pain. "It's no good, sir," said the shopman, as I moved with my natural helpfulness doorward, and presently the spoilt child was carried off, howling. "How do you manage that?" I said, breathing a little more freely. "Magic," said the shopman, with a careless wave of the hand. And behold, sparks of colored fire flew out of his fingers and vanished into the shadows of the shop. "You were saying," he said, addressing himself to Gip, "before you came in that you would like one of our Buy One and Astonish Your Friends boxes." Gip, after a gallant effort, said, "Yeah, it's in your pocket." And leaning over the counter, he really had an extraordinarily long body. This amazing person produced the article in the customary conjurer's manner. "Paper," he said, and took a sheet out of the empty hat with the springs. "String." And behold, his mouth was a string box from which he drew an unending thread, which, when he had tied his parcel, he bit off, and it seemed to me he swallowed the ball of string. And then he lit a candle at the nose of one of the ventriloquist's dummies, stuck one of his fingers, which had become sealing wax red, into the flame, and so sealed the parcel. "Then there was the disappearing egg," he remarked, and produced one from within my coat breast and packed it, and also the crying baby, very human. I handed each parcel to Gip as it was ready, and he clasped them to his chest. He said very little, but his eyes were eloquent. The clutch of his arms was eloquent. He was the playground of unspeakable emotions. These, you know, were real magics. Then, with a start, I discovered something moving about in my hat. Something soft and jumpy. I whipped it off, and a ruffled pigeon, no doubt a Confederate, dropped out and ran on the counter and went, I fancy, into a cardboard box behind the papier-mâché tiger. "Tut, tut," said the shopman, dexterously relieving me of my headdress. "Careless bird, and, as I live, nesting." He shook my hat and shook out into his extended hand 2 or 3 eggs, a large marble, a watch, about a half a dozen of the inevitable glass balls, and then crumpled, crinkled paper, more and more and more, talking all the time of the way in which people neglect to brush their hats, inside as well as out, politely, of course, but with a certain personal application. "All sorts of things accumulate, sir. Not you, of course, in particular. Nearly every customer. Astonishing what they carry about with them." The crumpled paper rose and billowed on the counter, more and more and more, until he was nearly hidden from us, until he was altogether hidden, and still his voice went on and on. "We none of us know what the fair semblance of a human being may conceal, sir. Are we all then no better than brushed exteriors, whitened sepulchres? His voice stopped, exactly like when you hit a neighbor's gramophone with a well-aimed brick. The same instant silence, and the rustle of the paper stopped, and everything was still. Have you done with my hat? I said after an interval. There was no answer. I stared at Gip, and Gip stared at me, and there were our distortions in the magic mirrors, looking very rum and grave and quiet. I think we'll go now, I said. Will you tell me how much all this comes to? I say, I said, on a rather louder note, I want the bill and my hat, please. It might have been a sniff from behind the paper pile. Let's look behind the counter, Gip, I said. He's making fun of us. I led Gip round the head-wagging tiger, and what do you think there was behind the counter? No one at all. Only my hat on the floor, and a common conjurer's lop-eared white rabbit lost in meditation and looking as stupid and crumpled as only a conjurer's rabbit can do. I resumed my hat, and the rabbit lolloped a lollop or so out of my way. Dada? Said Gip in a guilty whisper. What is it, Gip? Said I. I do like this shop, Dada. So should I said to myself. If the counter wouldn't suddenly extend itself to shut off from the door. But I didn't call Gip's attention to that. Pussy, he said with a hand out to the rabbit as it came lolloping past us. Pussy, do Gip a magic! And his eyes followed it as it squeezed through a door I had certainly not remarked a moment before. Then this door opened wider, and the man with one ear larger than the other appeared again. He was smiling still, but his eye met mine with something between amusement and defiance. You'd like to see our showroom, sir, he said, with an innocent suavity. Gip tugged my finger forward. I glanced at the counter and met the shopman's eye again. I was beginning to think that the magic was just a little too genuine. We haven't very much time, I said, but somehow we were inside the showroom before I could finish that. All goods of the same quality, said the shopman, rubbing his flexible hands together. And that is the best. Nothing in the place that isn't genuine magic and warranted thoroughly. Excuse me, sir. I felt him pull at something that clung to my coat sleeve, and then I saw he held a little wriggling red demon by the tail. The little creature bit and fought and tried to get at his hand, and in a moment he tossed it carelessly behind the counter. No doubt the thing was only an image of twisted India rubber, but for the moment... And his gesture was exactly that of a man who handles some petty, biting bit of vermin. I glanced at Gip, but Gip was looking at a magic rocking horse. I was glad he hadn't seen the thing. I said, in an undertone and indicating Gip and the red demon with my eyes, you haven't many things like that about, have you? None of ours. Probably brought it with you, said the shopman. Also in an undertone, with a more dazzling smile than ever. Astonishing what people will carry about with them unawares. And then to Gip, "Do you see anything you fancy here?" There were many things that Gip fancied there. He turned to this astonishing tradesman with mingled confidence and respect. "Is that a magic sword?" he said. "A magic toy sword. It neither bends, breaks, nor cuts the fingers. It renders the bearer invincible in battle against anyone under 18. Half a crown to 7 and 6pence, according to size. These panoplies on cards are for juvenile knights errant and very useful. Shield of safety, sandals of swiftness, a helmet of invisibility." "Oh, Daddy!" gasped Gip. I tried to find out what they cost, but the shopman did not heed me. He had got Gip now. He had got him away from my finger. He had embarked upon the exposition of all of his confounded stock, and nothing was going to stop him. Presently I saw with a qualm of distrust and something very like jealousy that Gip had hold of this person's finger as usual as he has hold of mine. No doubt the fellow was interesting, I thought, and had an interesting faked a lot of stuff. Really good faked stuff. Still. I wandered after them, saying very little, but keeping an eye on this prestidigital fellow. After all, Gip was enjoying it. And no doubt, when the time came to go, we should be able to go quite easily. It was a long, rambling place, that showroom, a gallery, broken up by stands and stalls and pillars with archways leading off to other departments, in which the queerest-looking assistants loafed and stared at one, and with perplexing mirrors and curtains. So perplexing, indeed, were these that I was presently unable to make out the door by which we had come in. The shopman showed Gip magic trains that ran without steam or clockwork, just as you set the signals, and then some very, very valuable boxes of soldiers that all came alive directly when you took off the lid and said, I myself haven't a very quick ear, and it was a tongue-twisting sound, but Gip, he had his mother's ear. He got it in no time. "Bravo!" said the shopman, putting the men back into the box unceremoniously and handing it to Gip. "Now," said the shopman, and in a moment, Gip had made them all alive again. "You'll take that box?" asked the shopman. "We'll take that box," said I, "unless you charge its full value, in which case it would need a trust magnate." "Dear heart, no!" And the shopman swept the little men back again, shut the lid, waved the box in the air, and there it was, in brown paper, tied up and with Gip's full name and address on the paper. The shopman laughed at my amazement. "This is the genuine magic," he said. "The real thing." "It's a little too genuine for my taste," I said again. After that, he fell to showing Gip tricks. Odd tricks, and still odder the way they were done. He explained them, and he turned them inside out, and there was the dear little chap nodding his busy bit of a head in the sagest manner. I did not attend as well as I might. "Hey, presto!" said the magic shopman, and then would come the clear, small, "Hey, presto!" of the boy. But I was distracted by other things. It was being borne in upon me just how tremendously run this place was. It was, so to speak, inundated by a sense of rumness. There was something a little rum about the fixtures even, about the ceiling, about the floor, about the casually distributed chairs. I had a queer feeling that Whenever I wasn't looking at them straight, they went askew and moved about and played a noiseless puss in the corner behind my back. And the cornice had a serpentine design with masks. Masks altogether too expressive for proper plaster. Then, abruptly, my attention was caught by one of the odd-looking assistants. He was some way off and evidently unaware of my presence. I saw a sort of three-quarter length of him over a pile of toys and through an arch, and he was leaning against a pillar in an idle sort of way, doing the most horrid thing with his features. The particular horrid thing he did was with his nose. He did it just as though he was idle and wanted to amuse himself. First of all, it was a short, blobby nose. Then, suddenly, he shot it out like a telescope. And then out of it flew and became thinner and thinner until it was like a long, red, flexible whip. Like a thing in a nightmare it was. He flourished it about and flung it forth as a fly fisher flings his line. My instant thought was that Gip mustn't see. I turned about, and there was Gip, quite preoccupied with the shopman, and thinking no evil. They were whispering together and looking at me. Gip was standing on a little stool, and the shopman was holding a big sort of drum in his hand. "Hide and seek, Dada!" cried Gip. "You're he!" And before I could do anything to prevent it, the shopman had clapped the big drum over him. I saw what was up directly. "Take that off!" I cried. "This instant! You'll frighten the boy! Take it off!" The shopman, with the unequal ears, did so without a word and held the big cylinder toward me to show its emptiness, and the little stool was vacant. In that instant, my boy had utterly disappeared. Perhaps, that sinister something that comes like a hand out of the unseen and grips your heart about. It takes your common self away and leaves you tense and deliberate, neither slow nor hasty, neither angry nor afraid. So it was with me. I came up to this grinning shopman and kicked his stool aside. "Stop this folly," I said. "Where's my boy?" "You see," he said, still displaying the drum's interior, "there's no deception." I put my hand out to grip him, and he eluded me by a dexterous movement. I snatched again, and he turned from me and pushed open a door to escape. "Stop!" I said, and he laughed, receding. I leapt after him into utter darkness. Thud. "Oi, Lord bless my heart, sir. I didn't see you coming, sir." I was in Regent Street, and I had collided with a decent-looking working man. And a yard away, perhaps, and looking a little perplexed with himself, was Gip. There was some sort of apology, and then Gip had turned and come to me with a bright little smile as though for a moment he had missed me. And he was carrying 4 parcels in his arm. He secured immediate possession of my finger. For the second, I was rather at a loss. I stared round to see the door of the magic shop, and behold, it was not there. There was no door, no shop, nothing. Only the common pilaster between the shop where they sell pictures and the window with the small chicks. I did the only thing possible in that mental tumult. I walked straight to the curbstone and held up my umbrella for a cab. "Hansoms," said Gip in a note of accumulating exultation. I helped him in, recalled my address with an effort, and got in also. Something unusual proclaimed itself in my tailcoat pocket, and I felt and delivered a glass ball. With petulant expression, I flung it into the street. Gip said nothing. For a space, neither of us spoke.
Dada,
said Gip at last.
that was a proper shop.
I came round with that to the problem of just how the whole thing had seemed to him. He looked completely undamaged. So far, so good. He was neither scarred nor unhinged. He was simply tremendously satisfied with the afternoon's entertainment. And there, in his arms, were the 4 parcels. Confound it! What could be in them? I said, little boys can't go to shops like that every day. He received this with his usual stoicism, and for a moment I was sorry I was his father and not his mother, and so couldn't suddenly there, in public, in our hansom cab, kiss him. After all, I thought, the thing wasn't so very bad. But it was only when we opened the parcels that I really began to be reassured. 3 of them contained boxes of soldiers, quite ordinary lead soldiers, but of so good a quality as to make Gip altogether forget that originally these parcels had been magic tricks of the only genuine sort, and the 4th contained a kitten. A little living white kitten in excellent health and appetite and temper. I saw this unpacking with a sort of provisional relief. I hung about in the nursery for quite an unconscionable time. That happened 6 months ago. And now I'm beginning to believe it is all right. The kitten had only the magic natural to all kittens, and the soldiers seem as steady a company as any colonel could desire. And Gip? The intelligent parent will understand that I have to go cautiously with Gip. But I went so far as this one day. I said, how would you like your soldiers to come alive, Gip, and march about by themselves? Mine do, said Gip. I just have to say a word, I know, before I open the lid. Then they march about alone. Oh, quite, Dada. I shouldn't like 'em if they didn't do that. I displayed no unbecoming surprise. And since then, I've taken occasion to drop in upon him once or twice unannounced when the soldiers were about. But so far, I have never discovered them performing in anything like a magical manner. It's so difficult to tell. There's also a question of finance. I have an incurable habit of paying bills. I've been up and down Regent Street several times looking for that shop. I'm inclined to think, indeed, that in that matter, honor is satisfied, and that, since Gip's name and address are also known to them, I may very well leave it to these people, whoever they may be, to send in their bill in their own time. This story that I'm about to read predates anything of any supernatural bent that this might resemble. If anything in this seems cliche, it is because this short story set it down so well to a world who had never heard of lycanthropy, except possibly in old Romanian folk tales. Enough said. This is Gabriel Ernest by Saki. There's a wild beast in your woods, said the artist Cunningham as he was being driven to the station. It was the only remark he had made during the drive, but as Van Cheele had talked incessantly, his companion's silence had not been noticeable. A stray fox or two and some resident weasels. Nothing more formidable, said Van Cheele. The artist said nothing. What did you mean about a wild beast? Said Van Cheele later when they were on the platform. Nothing, my imagination. Here's the train, said Cunningham. That afternoon, Van Cheele went for one of his frequent rambles through his woodland property. He had stuffed a bittern in his study and knew the names of quite a number of wildflowers, so his aunt had possibly some justification in describing him as a great naturalist. At any rate, he was a great walker. It was his custom to take mental notes of everything he saw during his walks, not so much for the purpose of assisting contemporary science as to provide topics for conversation afterwards. When the bluebells began to show themselves in flower, he made a point of informing everyone of the fact. I immediately, by the way, related to this guy because all this spring and summer, every time I'm on the phone with anyone, I'm so attached to nature in this seclusion that every new flower blooming, every new bird migrating in or out of the area is like the local news as far as I'm concerned, and it's a lot more sane than what the Big Bear locals are usually talking about on the online forums. So when the bluebells began to show themselves in flower, he made a point of informing everyone of the fact. The season of the year might have warned his hearers of the likelihood of such an occurrence, but at least they felt like he was being absolutely frank with them. What Van Cheele saw on this particular afternoon was, however, something far removed from his ordinary range of experience. On a shelf of smooth stone, overhanging a deep pool in the hollow of an oak coppice, a boy of about 16 lay asprawl, drying his wet brown limbs luxuriously in the sun. His wet hair, parted by a recent dive, lay close to his head, and his light brown eyes, so light that there was an almost tigerish gleam in them, were turned toward Van Cheele with a certain lazy watchfulness. It was an unexpected apparition, and Van Cheele found himself engaged in the novel process of thinking before he spoke. Where on earth could this wild-looking boy hail from? The miller's wife had lost a child some 2 months ago, supposed to have been swept away by the mill race, but that had been a mere baby, not a half-grown lad. "What are you doing there?" he demanded. "Obviously sunning myself," replied the boy. "Where do you live?" "Here, in these woods." "You can't live in the woods," said Van Cheele. "These are very nice woods, Governor," said the boy, with a touch of patronage in his voice. "But where do you sleep at night?" "I don't sleep at night. That's my busiest time." Van Shiel began to have an irritated feeling that he was grappling with a problem that was eluding him. "What do you feed on?" he asked. "Flesh," said the boy, and he pronounced the word with slow relish, as though he were tasting it. "Flesh? What flesh?" "Why, since it interests you, rabbits, wild fowl, hares, poultry, lambs in the season. Children when I can get any. They're usually too well locked in at night when I do most of me hunting. It's quite 2 months since I tasted child flesh." Ignoring the chafing nature of the last remark, Van Shiel tried to draw the boy on the subject of possible poaching operations. "You're talking rather through your hat when you speak of feeding on hares." Considering the nature of the boy's toilette, the simile was hardly an apt one. "Our hillside hares aren't easily caught." "At night, I hunt on 4 feet," was the somewhat cryptic response. "I suppose you mean that you hunt with a dog," hazarded Van Shiel. The boy rolled slowly over onto his back and laughed, a weird, low laugh that was pleasantly like a chuckle and disagreeably like a snarl. "I don't fancy any dog would be very anxious for my company, especially at night." Van Shiel began to feel that there was something positively uncanny about the strange-eyed, strange-tongued youngster. "I can't have you staying in these woods," he declared authoritatively. "I fancy you'd rather have me here than in your house," said the boy. The prospect of this wild, nude animal in Van Shiel's primly ordered house was certainly an alarming one. "If you don't go, I shall have to make you," said Van Shiel. The boy turned like a flash, plunged in the pool, and in a moment had flung his wet and glistening body halfway up the bank where Van Shiel was standing. In an otter, the movement would not have been remarkable. In a boy, Van Shiel found it sufficiently startling. His foot slipped as he made an involuntarily backward movement, and he found himself almost prostrate on the slippery, weed-grown bank, with those tigerish yellow eyes not very far from his own. Almost instinctively, he half raised a hand to his throat. The boy laughed again, a laugh in which the snarl had nearly driven out the chuckle, and then, with another of his astonishing lightning movements, plunged out of view into a tangling yield of weed and fern. "What an extraordinary animal," said Van Shiel as he picked himself up, and then he recalled Cunningham's remark. "There's a wild beast in your woods." Walking slowly homeward, Van Shiel began to turn over in his mind various local occurrences which might be traceable to the existence of this astonishing young savage. Something had been thinning the game in the woods lately. Poultry had been missing from the farms, hares were growing unaccountably scarcer, and complaints had reached him of lambs being carried off bodily from the hills. Was it possible that this wild boy was really hunting the countryside in company with some clever poacher dogs? He had spoken of hunting 4-footed by night, but then, again, he had hinted strangely at no dog caring to come near him, especially at night. It was certainly puzzling. And then, as Van Shiel ran his mind over the various depredations that had been committed during the last month or two, he came suddenly to a dead stop, alike in his walk and his speculations. The child missing from the mill 2 months ago. The accepted theory was that it had tumbled into the mill race and been swept away. But the mother had always declared she had heard a shriek on the hillside of the house in the opposite direction from the water. It was unthinkable, of course, but he wished that the boy had not made that uncanny remark about child flesh eaten 2 months ago. Such dreadful things should not be said, even in fun. Van Shiel, contrary to his usual wont, did not feel disposed to be communicative about his discovery in the wood. His position as a parish councillor and justice of the peace seemed somehow compromised by the fact that he was harboring a personality of such doubtful repute on his property. There was even a possibility that a heavy bill of damages for raided lambs and poultry might be laid at his door. At dinner that night, he was quite unusually silent.
"Where's your voice gone off to?" said his aunt. "One would think you'd seen a wolf."
Van Shiel, who was not familiar with the old saying, thought the remark rather foolish. If he had seen a wolf on his property, his tongue would have been extraordinarily busy with the subject. At breakfast next morning, Van Shiel was conscious that his feeling of uneasiness regarding yesterday's episode had not wholly disappeared, and he resolved to go by train to the neighboring cathedral town, hunt up Cunningham, learn from him what he had really seen that had prompted the remark about a wild beast in the woods. With this resolution taken, his usual cheerfulness partly returned. He hummed a bright little melody as he sauntered to the morning room for his customary cigarette. As he entered the room, the melody made way abruptly for a pious invocation. Gracefully asprawl on the ottoman, in an attitude of almost exaggerated repose, was the boy of the woods. He was drier than when Van Shiel had last seen him, but no other alteration was noticeable in his toilette. "How dare you come here?" asked Van Shiel furiously. "You told me I was not to stay in the woods," said the boy calmly. "But not to come here. Supposing my aunt should see you." And with a view to minimizing that catastrophe, Van Shiel hastily obscured as much of his unwelcome guest as possible under the folds of a morning post. At that moment, his aunt entered the room. "This is a poor boy who's lost his way and lost his memory. He doesn't know who he is or where he comes from," explained Van Shiel desperately, glancing apprehensively at the waif's face to see whether or not he was going to add inconvenient candor to his other savage propensities. Miss Van Shiel was enormously interested. Perhaps his underlinen is marked," she suggested. "He seems to have lost most of that too," said Van Shiel, making frantic little grabs at the Morning Post to keep it in its place. A naked, homeless child appealed to Miss Van Shiel as warmly as a stray kitten or a derelict puppy would have done. We must do all that we can for him, she decided. And in a very short time, a messenger dispatched to the rectory, where a page boy was kept, had returned with a suit of pantry clothes and the necessary accessories of shirt, shoes, collar, etc. Clothed, clean, and groomed, the boy lost none of his uncanniness in Van Shiel's eyes, but his aunt found him sweet. We must call him something till we know who he really is, she said. Gabriel Ernest, I think. Those are nice, suitable names. Van Shiel agreed, but he privately doubted whether they were being grafted onto a nice, suitable child. His misgivings were not diminished by the fact that his staid and elderly spaniel had bolted out of the house at the first incoming of the boy, and now obstinately remained shivering and yapping at the farther end of the orchard, while the cannery, usually as vocally industrious as Van Shiel himself, had put itself on an allowance of frightened cheeps. More than ever, he was resolved to consult Cunningham without loss of time. As he drove off to the station, his aunt was arranging that Gabriel Ernest should help her to entertain the infant members of her Sunday school class at tea that afternoon. Cunningham was not at first disposed to be communicative. My mother died of some brain trouble, he explained, so you will understand why I'm averse to dwelling on anything impossibly fantastic nature that I may see or think I have seen. But what did you see? Persisted Van Shiel. What I thought I saw was something so extraordinary that no really sane man could dignify it with the credit of having actually happened. I was standing. The last evening I was with you, half hidden in the hedge growth by the orchard gate, watching the dying glow of the sunset. Suddenly, I became aware of a naked boy, a bather of some neighboring pool, I took him to be, who was standing out on the bare hillside, also watching the sunset. His pose was so suggestive of some wild faun of pagan myth that I instantly wanted to engage him as a model, and in another moment, I think I should have hailed him, but just then, the sun dipped out of view, and all the orange and pink slid out of the landscape, leaving it cold and gray. And at the same moment, an astounding thing happened. The boy vanished, too. What? Vanished away into nothing? Asked Van Shiel excitedly. No. That is the dreadful part of it, answered the artist. On the open hillside, where the boy had been standing a second ago, stood a large wolf, blackish in color, with gleaming fangs and cruel yellow eyes. You may think, Van Shiel, did not stop for anything as futile as thought. Already he was tearing at top speed toward the station. He dismissed the idea of a telegram. Gabriel Ernest as a werewolf was as hopelessly inadequate effort as conveying the situation, and his aunt would think it was a code message to which he had omitted to giving her the key. His one hope was that he might reach home before sundown. The cab, which he had chartered at the other end of the railway journey, bore him with what seemed exasperating slowness across the country roads, which were pink and mauve with a sunset. His aunt was putting away some unfinished jams and cake when he arrived. "Where's Gabriel Ernest?" he almost screamed. "He's taking the little tube child home," said his aunt. "It was getting so late, I thought it wasn't safe to let it go back alone. What a lovely sunset, isn't it?" But Van Shiel, although not oblivious to the glow in the western sky, did not stay to discuss its beauties. At a speed for which he was scarcely geared, he raced along the narrow lane that led to the home of the Toops. On one side ran the swift current of the mill stream. On the other rose the stretch of bare hillside. A dwindling rim of red sun showed still on the skyline, and the next turning must bring him in view of the ill-assorted couple he was pursuing. Then the color went suddenly out of things, and a gray light settled itself with a quick shiver over the landscape. Van Shiel heard a shrill wail of fear and stopped running. Nothing was ever seen again of the Toop child or Gabriel Ernest, but the latter's discarded garments were found lying in the road. So it was assumed that the child had fallen into the water and that the boy had stripped and jumped in a vain endeavor to save it. Van Shiel and some workmen who were nearby at the time testified to having heard a child scream loudly just near the spot where the clothes were found. Miss Toop, who had 11 other children, was decently resigned to her bereavement, but Miss Van Shiel sincerely mourned her lost foundling. It was on her initiative that a memorial in brass was put up in the parish church to Gabriel Ernest, an unknown boy who bravely sacrificed his life for another. Van Shiel gave way to his aunt in most things, but he flatly refused to subscribe to the Gabriel Ernest Memorial.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Fireside Tailes with Wolfgang. To view more of my work, check out my YouTube channel at Hunter's Acoustic Cabin. Directed by Hunter Ackerman. Endorsed by Wolfgang Beastly. Produced by GWC Productions. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions YouTube channel, CAPS Media Television Channel 6, KPPQ LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network.